and welcome to the Healthy by Heather Brown podcast, where I encourage you in healthy mind, body, and spirit through my Sunday reset. Let's get into it. Hello, Girl Gang, and welcome back to another episode of Healthy by Heather Brown. I'm so amped today to welcome Angela Hanscom to the show, and I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a background about who she is and why I thought she would be a perfect fit for the Healthy by Heather Brown show. So you guys know that we talk every week about how it's really important not just to work your physical body, but also your mental and your spiritual health, and how we really want to be good stewards of the Lord and show our babies how to grow up in mind, body, and spirit health as well. And due to that, I have become just such a huge proponent of getting my kids active outside, playing with their kids, their age, their peers, getting them off screens, because y'all, the mental health ramifications off of kids being on screens is just becoming so evident. And so I thought, who better than to bring onto the show today than Angela to talk about how we can help our kids have healthy minds and healthy bodies as we're tackling this crazy tech world that we live in. So with all that said, she is the author of Balance and Barefoot, which is a book that released, and she's also the founder of Timbernook, which that was a new concept to me. I actually found out about her on 1000 Hours Outside. And y'all, I can't wait for you to hear the concept. It's so cool. So without further ado, Angela Hanscom, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
You're so very welcome. We are so excited to get into all the, I literally want to say, instead of the nitty gritty, like the dirty and outdoorsy with you today. That's awesome. So fun. So tell everybody a little bit about Timbernook and what brought this concept to life, because I don't think you have any near us, but I hope you're going to be bringing some to Birmingham and the Southeast soon.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Yeah, so Timbernook started in my backyard, really for my own children. And so I'm a pediatric occupational therapist, so I should probably say that first.
I did not know that. That's very cool.
Yeah. And so I was working in what we call traditional clinic setting, where we try to engineer things to be sensory. We have, plastic balance beams with little pickies on it. We bring swings and we bring them indoors, or we'll bring a little box of sand and call that sensory inside. And I was having clients come in that didn't like wind in their face and, didn't want to get dirty. And remember thinking, how do I treat that indoors? Because traditionally occupational therapists are inside.
Right.
And so then I had my second daughter. I have 3 children, 2 teenage girls now. One actually just graduated high school, and then I have a son who's 8. And when my second daughter was born, I actually decided to stay home with them, and I had no plans to work or be, I never my dream was to be an occupational therapist. And so I stayed home with them, and I just started noticing things around me and paying attention, I guess. And my daughter's friends, a lot of them needed occupational therapy. And I remember thinking, why is this happening? Why do so many kids need occupational therapy? That was really more reserved for children with more severe disabilities when I was growing up in the early 80s. And so I was really just paying attention to my surroundings and what I was hearing. And the other thing that was happening was I noticed that there was not a lot of children playing outdoors. I live in New Hampshire. We live on about 12 acres of private land, woodland, but we have 50 acres of conservation surrounding us. So we really live in the boonies. But
Wow.
We take a shortcut through a neighborhood, and there's a lot of kids in that neighborhood. And I just was like, where are they? Why are they not biking to each other's home? And so I knew I wanted to do something outdoors. And I thought it was in the form of nature classes until I ran my first one. And I had a parent come up to me with their son in hand and ask me, why do the leaves change color? Tell my son, and I was like, it has something to do with a pigment, I think, just trying to remember from my own science classes in high school. But it really helped me to reflect on my profession. I'm like, I'm not a teacher. I'm not a naturalist or environmentalist. And I kept thinking, what does an occupational therapist have anything to do with nature programming? And that's when I realized that the occupation of a child is play. The most important occupation of a child is play. And outdoor play is a very meaningful occupation that most of us, if you ask any adult, what was your fondest memory growing up, they'll say that. And so really the whole mission behind Timbernook is just to restore and protect that, to bring back the occupation of outdoor play and make it as authentic as possible. So really telling the adults to get out of the way, because there's so many adult fears, adult agendas, and to just get rid of all of it and to just focus on authentic play out in the woods with other children of various ages to replicate, true neighborhood play, but in, you call, God's country, right? So
Yeah, totally.
and that's where the magic, they call it magic, but that's where the beauty happens, is where kids really transform out there, is because they're allowed to come up with their own play ideas and execute those play schemes with other children without an adult directing it for them. And so we see amazing things out there because of that.
That's incredible. So for those of us that have no concept of a Timbernook, I've only seen it, on Instagram. If we were to drive up to a Timbernook, what does it look like? Is there an inside portion at all? Is it like a day camp, a week-long camp, or do you pay per hour? I just would love to kind of get a better visual of the concept. Yeah.
Yeah. So Timbernook is a program, and we have private organizations, nonprofits that get licensed in the program, or an individual might get licensed. So for instance, you probably listened to this podcast, but Cassie is another occupational therapist that felt like she was seeing so many issues in schools with behaviors and stuff. And so she felt called to do this and trained, and as an occupational therapist, bringing authentic occupation to her community. So people run it as a form of summer camps. Actually, that's how it started. It started as a summer camp.
Okay.
And then what happened was we realized there were so many benefits to the program, and we were seeing change in children in a short period of time. We were thinking, how about year-round programming? So then we did forced programming year-round. We do night experiences, birthday parties, field trips. So now schools are coming to Timbernook and having a field trip, and it's like planting seeds. They're starting to see kids more capable than they realized out of that classroom setting. And a lot of these providers have the opportunity to actually go into schools and bring Timbernook in there and create change to the culture. The other thing that's happening is we have schools that are certified to do Timbernook. So they actually have it as part of their school week. We have a local Christian school. It's called Laconia Christian Academy that's been doing Timbernook for 5 years now. And they start off with Timbernook for 2 hours a week. Just every grade got 2 hours of Timbernook time. And what happened was they started changing their recess. So then they went from a half an hour recess to a full hour because of Timbernook, and that's separate. So they have
so
an hour. I know, an hour recess every day, 2 hours of Timbernook. And then year 2, they decided to increase their Timbernook time to twice a week for every grade up to 5th grade. So they have 4 hours of Timbernook time and an hour recess every day. And so now we're researching with the University of New Hampshire and how it's actually changing the culture at their school, and how kids are happier and they're finding joy, and the adults are finding joy out there because they know they're giving children what they need. A ripple effect, basically.
Yeah, no kidding. And I think that there's so much power in just being outside. Like we talk all the time here on the podcast with different therapists and all the things too, about how just getting outside and walking and getting your feet barefoot on the ground and being in the sunlight, what powerful tools those are for depression and anxiety. So it's like, well, I can only imagine that would be a ripple effect, not only for the kids, but then for the teachers and then for the parents. So that is just so powerful and awesome.
Yes.
Wow. So tell us a little bit about, because I think that one thing that I know I'm seeing, and I think that we're seeing it nationwide, is that some people are starting to wake up to the problem that we are seeing in our country, just of young kids having these phones. I mean, I don't know what it's like in New Jersey, but I mean, we're seeing even sometimes there's even 2nd and 3rd grade kids that have phones or tablets that they have free reign of. I know certainly by 5th, 6th, and 7th grade, I'm talking to neighbors that are like, yeah, I mean, at that age, your kids are 100% in the minority if they don't have phones, which I think is just terrifying. So as a professional, do you mind kind of just speaking into some of the dangers of that? And then also maybe even just giving some parents encouragement about why to stay strong against it, or even if they've already given the phone, how can they help them regulate that in your professional opinion?
Oh, absolutely. So my daughter, Joelle, who's the oldest, who's 19, actually was on the podcast for Jenny Urich recently as well. And we didn't allow phones till high school. Okay. And so she grew up playing Timbernook. And so they basically create their own societies out in the woods. And, basically, she grew up building forts and having to defend her fort and being really strong and capable of setting boundaries but having a lot of time with like in-person communication, like, that's not okay, dude, like, you just stole from our fort, and basically having the language to resolve their own problems and being allowed to have some conflict in play, because that's how you actually learn conflict resolution and all that stuff. So it made her, like, both of my daughters really strong when they went to high school. And like, she right away was like, just really well receptive with other people. She's very personable, very easy to get along with, but she would also set boundaries. Like, I don't want to hear about that. Like, and very strong morals too. So I think people were like, whoa, who is this girl? But she talked to Jenny about how, because of Timbernook, she will parent differently. And so like, it has a generational effect. So like, her children will be strong as well, I'm sure. Like, we'll have plenty of outdoor adventure time. And it's translated into, like, having her own adventures. Like, her friends and her, they all go to dirt biking and dirt pits, like they go on a 50-mile snowmobile trip, just adventurous in other ways. And I think the technology piece is interesting because she was able to see how, not having that for so long, like how like in-person experiences are so much more important to her than this virtual reality, which a lot of times we're finding the kids are pretty lonely because they're not having the same experience. And as an OT, I feel like there's a huge sensory component to that. Like, you're not engaging all the senses. So,
oh yeah.
Yeah. So like, if you're outdoors building forts, like, you're getting like we call it heavy work as occupational therapists. A lot of kids that are in technology, they might be pushing buttons, but they're not getting resistance to the joints and muscles, which is called the proprioceptive system. And that tells you where your limbs are in relation to each other. And it also helps you to know how much force to use when playing games like tag without hitting too hard, or writing with a pencil without breaking the lead every time. Or maybe they catch a frog and they're squeezing it too hard. That's because a lot of those kids are not getting enough deep, heavy work, where resistance work, where, push-pull activities, which can be gained through outdoor play. Think about it, like climbing a tree, you're getting nice resistance to joints and muscles. Building a dam, you're picking up rocks, and that's all developing those. And so, we're at the point where we're banning tag because kids are getting too, quote, aggressive. But I would argue, that like, maybe we should understand why that's happening. Why are kids pushing too hard and they're just not developing those senses enough. So if you think about it, just sitting all day and then going home and playing video games is not going to give you the resistance you need to develop that sense properly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was talking with someone else about this, and they were reading a book about just kids and being outside and all these kind of things. And one of the things they said, the point that they were reading in a book, was that as parents, we're typically so afraid to send our kids, a quarter of a mile down the street to go play at a park, or we're so worried about if they're outside, we're not watching them. And so they were like, we basically, as my generation, your generation, like on up, we grew up as outdoor play kids. And we now have, this generation is growing up as an indoor, isolated phone generation. And they were like, but when you think about that, what are actually the odds of them getting stolen or kidnapped or, God forbid, even worse than that, on the way to the park? It's probably actually a really small percentage, depending on, where you live and lots of different factors. But what are the odds of the danger that is coming upon them in your own home at this phone or tablet that you have no idea? And I think that hearing it put in those words, I was like, wow, that's really eye-opening. And I started listening to the podcast interview, and y'all, I'll link 1,000 Hours Outside if you don't know what it is. But anyway, it's a book and a podcast. Jenny does it. She does a fantastic job encouraging parents to get their kids outside to play. But one of the things that she was talking about with your daughter that I thought was so fascinating was your daughter was saying parents can't see inside the schools what it looks like. And even how she talked about before class and after class during lunch. Will you describe that for everybody? Because I just thought, wow, that is something.
Yeah. So she, I think what she recognizes is that kids are always on their technology. Like, it's almost like a bad habit, and it's very addictive. So they're constantly on the screens. And so she, would be like trying to communicate with someone, and they would be on their phones all the time. So that's definitely an issue. I also think I think like just because the girls are old enough to start dating and that kind of thing, like just the relationships that people are having that don't have that foundation, they're just struggling, or they have this warped sense of what communication looks like, or a normal relationship. And both, and even but amongst girls, like she knows there's a lot of drama, and she's like, I just like she doesn't like stuff like that. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of insecurity, and it's just really sad. There's a lot of like misperceptions and lack of proper communication. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely at an all-time high. And I think that we're seeing it all across our nation in lots of different ways it's playing out. And I mean, I think specifically about even from the political spectrum now, it's like, back in when my parents would be talking about it with their friends, it was just a discourse. It was just exchanging ideas, and you could have respect for the other person. And now it's like, oh, well, you believe this one thing differently than I do, then like we can't be friends anymore. And it's just like, wait, what? Why not?
Yeah, there's so much division. Yes. Absolutely.
It's wild. So I do think that is one thing that's like, there's so many things that are non-tangibles that simply playing outside really does provide for you. Some of the things that she talked about on that podcast episode that I thought were so encouraging to hear was that it built resilience for her, bravery, confidence, and truly, like you said, just a full and exciting life, because she isn't afraid to go do those snowmobile trips or go skiing or what have you, which is just awesome. So as an occupational therapist, will you share what are some of the things about outdoor play that you can't get seated at a desk, and why should we be working to get our kids outside more?
Oh, yeah. One of the biggest ones that people don't realize is that if we're constantly sitting in an upright position, we're not getting what we call the vestibular input we need, like that balance sense. And so kids are becoming more and more unsafe, actually, because they're not moving enough. And so we're restricting not only their outdoor playtime, but their movement. So kids are in a chair. The most recent research I sat in was 9 hours a day, American kids are in a seat. And so that's a lot of time of sitting. And what really needs to happen is we need to move in vigorous ways. Like we need to spin in circles. Kids need to roll down the hills and go upside down and move in ways that make adults literally gasp. Like they need to climb trees. And that's because inside your inner ear are little hair cells, and there's fluid in there. And we have to move in vigorous ways for the fluid to move back and forth, stimulate those hair cells, and really support and develop what we call the vestibular sense. And that sense is a unifying sense to all the other senses. So we talk a lot about sensory integration and having an organized brain so you can pay attention and learn. And that is the unifying sense. Like they need to move a lot more than we realize. They need to move and play outdoors at least 3 hours a day, basically. Wow. And so what's happening is, I will see a child spinning in circles, and I'll hear an adult say, don't spin because you're going to get dizzy. Or get down off that rock because you're going to get hurt. But really what needs to happen is our neurological system is designed to seek out the sensory input it needs to develop properly. And when adults say keep them from moving in those ways, we become the barrier to that neurological development. And so what's happening is kids are actually starting to fall out of their chairs and onto the ground in school, like becoming more and more just clumsy, like falling off playground equipment, that kind of thing. And the way we treat that in a clinic setting is we will put a child on a swing. This is why we have swings in our clinics, and we'll spin them in all different directions. So they have a really good sense of where their body is when they're navigating their environment. So what we really need to do is the healthcare world needs to work with the education world and allow kids to have plenty of movement opportunities so that they can be more safe and capable in their environment.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so awesome. I think it's so fascinating hearing just all that you're sharing. Like it goes even deeper than what I even perhaps realize, which is incredible. I am curious because when did your book come out, Balanced and Barefoot?
2016.
Okay, gotcha. So it's been out a while. Do you have, I guess, any major key takeaways in your book that you feel like you would want to make sure the audience knew? Because I would hate to rob you of the opportunity of other things, because I was just so into your conversation where I was like furiously taking notes. I was like, I want to hear all the things. But from your book, is there anything that you're like, man, if people knew this, it would be a game changer?
Yeah. So I mean, I think there's a number of things that are eye-opening, like that's just one component of the development that's changing because we're restricting kids so much.
Mm.
So I would encourage people to probably, if they can read the book, it's gonna open their eyes. And when I do keynote speak engagements too as well, it's just connecting the dots on how not playing outdoors enough is actually affecting development in ways we never imagined. But the other key piece to that is that there is a way forward. And so and it's really about inspiring independent play. I think we're so used to directing and entertaining kids, and technology entertains them, right? And so getting them in the space where they actually have to initiate their own play ideas and execute that. And that's called executive functioning skills, like higher level thinking skills. So we want entrepreneurs, we want, like our workforce is moving in that direction where we want people to be able to come up with their own ideas, but they have to practice that through play. And so I would really encourage parents that book also kind of gives you steps on how to do that, and it uses some of the Timbernook philosophy to inspire people on, well, how do you get to that point where they can play independently or with other children? And there's, ways to kind of scaffold it and then and kind of get yourself out of the way. The other big piece of Timbernook that's really helpful is the adults really step back and reduce adult presence out there. And that's a game changer. So when we have field trips come out, the teachers automatically want to get right in there. But what we learned over the years is if, let's say, kids are building a fort, if I'm standing right next to them, they start seeking constant adult reassurance from us. Like, is this okay? Or can you do this for me? Or they would tattle more often because we're right there. But if we backed up like 20 feet and got down low, so we're often sitting on cushions out there, like lifeguards, they would start turning to each other to come up with their own play ideas, execute it. And then if there is any problems, they are more likely to actually practice conflict resolution on their own and realize how capable they are of doing that.
Yeah, that's incredible. When you are talking about this, one thing that keeps coming to mind for me is, what about the mama that is like, yeah, I don't have any young kids that live in our neighborhood to keep my child entertained. Do you have any just thought starters for how to get her kids up and out, or what to do in that scenario?
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually why Timbernook is formed, because it's becoming harder and harder to do that. And so Timbernook's creating spaces for that. And hopefully, it continues to expand. However, there are ways to do it in your own backyard too. There's ways like that. It's not as grand scale as Timbernook by any means, but you do want your kids to become as independent as possible. So if you my kids actually didn't have neighborhood children, so I would invite kids over for the day and just have them drop their kids off.
Totally.
Because other kids are part of the environment and they will inspire them to play in new ways. And then the other big tip is to use adult items like fort building materials outside, like real planks, like old curtains that you can get at Goodwill for a couple bucks. Don't buy fancy Waldorf shears outside, old kitchenware, pulleys, ropes of different sizes, baskets, and you don't tell them what they're for. You can just say, you can use anything you see out here to play with. And those materials have many play affordances. So for instance, a basket, I might use it in 10 different ways to play, and you might come up with different ways, and we'll inspire each other. And that's how you get creative play over time is being bored with it and playing with it and experimenting and being inspired by others.
Absolutely. I love all this so much. My oldest was actually in occupational therapy. I don't know exactly I guess you would call it feeding therapy. It was all about sensory and touch. And so we were learning, how to expose them to new foods and this, that, and the other. But they really told me to work on sensory experiences. And I had no clue what that was as a new mom. And so kind of learning about all this is kind of what led me to just be so fascinated by women like you who are kind of pioneering the way in this of the old ideas coming back to be what we make our kids experience. And so I think that that's so cool that you're doing this. I'm so grateful to you for being willing to, get out there and do the hard work and to say things that are very countercultural right now. But I also am loving just the tangibles that you're giving people. So I know that when we did this, they said if you guys can practice some kind of sensory activity, a couple of times a week. And we would do silly things like, we get out like a little plastic bin and have toothbrushes and soap. And I would tell Leighton, like, you can, wash your cars, or, you're just doing something that has them touching and feeling different things and experiencing things with different senses. Would you say that there's anything that you would recommend as a guideline for people? Like, how often would be best, I guess, to be doing that type of stuff?
Yeah. So I would say, at least 3 hours a day outside.
Yeah.
And like the nice thing about outdoor play is it takes what you're talking about and puts it on a grand scale. So like kids playing in giant mud puddles is like a sensory bend times 1,000. Like there's endless opportunities, and you don't have to like worry about mess, and it's a whole body sensory experience, right? So it's so muddy, they're navigating, they're catching real frogs. And so I would really encourage more outdoor play and just think of it as the ultimate sensory experience.
Absolutely. Sure. Well, I'm so grateful for your time today. I will tell y'all just a couple of tangible ways, I guess, that we get our kids outside, and hopefully this helps somebody else. But my boys love a frog hunt. So you were talking about that. So that's like something we put on our summer bucket list. And the goal is we try to go like once a week or so, I would say, after it rains, because there are always more out there. As soon as it gets dark, you go outside and you look at the street lights, and there's usually, frogs under it because they want to catch the bugs that are drawn to the lights. And y'all, it is such a game. Like my boys, they're like, we've only caught 30 so far in one night. So next time we're going to get 35. Like it's just so fun. And then we also, me and another mom in the neighborhood have exchanged phone numbers. So that way we can talk about our schedules. Like, when can the kids play outside, being proactive. So whenever we talk on here about doing your Sunday reset, you're being intentional about the things that matter in mind, body, and spirit. And so for my kids, like, no, I don't want to do the work of a individual play date, but I can text a few moms in the neighborhood and just say, hey, what times are y'all around this week? So we can really make that a priority. And then also with my boys, it's like, they can get up in the morning after they do their chores, they can watch TV for a little bit, but then it's like, okay. And after that, like, we're done, you're outside. And don't be afraid to say, like our parents said to us, don't come in for 20 minutes. I'm setting the timer. If you come in and the timer's still going, you're not allowed back inside unless you got to go to the bathroom. Like, really, don't be afraid to make yourself uncomfortable, which then makes them uncomfortable and builds that confidence. It's so, so important. Wow. I really went on a long tangent. I got excited.
That's awesome.
Okay. Well, in closing, Angela, I ask everybody this question. I'm curious to hear how you reset. And that could be any way you want to interpret it, but just how do you reset?
Oh, yeah. So for me, I start my morning in prayer, and that sets me up for the day. So
Yes. I actually just saw this thing on Instagram, and it said word before world. And I was like, oh, that is such a good reminder that as soon as I wake up, to get in God's word or talking to God before I let the world infiltrate my brain. So you're exactly right. Setting up for that success. I love it.
Great.
Well, Angela, tell everybody where they can find you online, where they can learn more about Timbernook, all the things.
Yeah. So you can find us at timbernook.com, and you can look at locations to see where we're at. And then you can also look at the schools, so you can see what schools are certified. And then we're pretty active on Facebook. I'm just now getting into Instagram finally. But we're both on Instagram and Facebook.
Okay. I love it so much. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. Well, Girl Gang, I really hope that inspires you to get your kids outside today, not tomorrow, today. And wow, y'all, like 2 to 3 hours a day. That probably feels like a daunting commitment if you're not really doing much of that right now. So just remember to start small. You can always habit stack. You can start with 20 minutes and then build up to 30 minutes. And just remember that kids are resilient. They're tougher than we think that they are. They can handle so much. And we want to keep training them to handle more, to build up more, to get that physical strength, to really keep that mental strength and mental stamina building, growing. It's so, so cool how God has designed it. He designed us to be outside, and we want to be faithful in what we know biblically is true. All right, y'all. Well, all that said, I hope you have a wonderful day. I challenge you to get outside today. Tag me on Instagram. Make sure you follow, subscribe, and rate this podcast. And I'll see you next time. Hey, Girl Gang. Welcome back to another Marriage Corner. Today we've got some interesting and health focused topics that I can't wait to deep dive into with Eric Brown.
Yeah. So a lot of times Heather will send me crazy different memes or things of that nature. And sometimes I look at them, sometimes I don't. But this time she's like, you have to listen to this podcast. And it's Callie and Casey Means, and they're interviewed by Tucker Carlson. I know there might be some, very strong opinions about Tucker Carlson and things of that nature, but I don't think anybody can deny that he does do a great job interviewing, and he lets his interviewees speak, which I appreciate as well too. So it's all about health and kind of how the incentives in today's environment with anything in life, incentives as far as money is concerned and how that affects guidelines and health guidelines and just all different kinds of recommendations. And I thought Heather and I could give our top 3 takeaways from this podcast episode, which I think we both thought was great.
Yeah, definitely. It is long. It's 2 hours. So Eric said that he'd already seen a lot of them pop up in his reels on his Instagram algorithm already. So you certainly can see some of the highlights, but I cannot stress enough how much every American needs to listen to this podcast interview, especially parents. This episode is about children's health. And I kind of wanted to share some of the stats that to me made it worth paying attention to even more. That they said that 50% of American adults have prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. So half the country. That's wild. 30% of teens have prediabetes. And they said no pediatrician would have seen this in their lifetime. Even 50 years ago. Our cancer rates are up 79% in young adults. 25% of American women are on antidepressants. 40% of 18-year-olds have a mental health diagnosis. There are going to be over 2 million cases of cancer this year for the first time. And this was shocking to me, Eric. I don't know if you tune into this part, but she said the highest infant and mortality rate in the entire developed world, despite spending 2 times anywhere else in the world, is in America. So as an American woman, you have the highest risk of any other developed country in the world of not making it through childbirth. Like what?
Yeah, that definitely stood out to me as well too. But I guess, is that one of your top things that stood out to you, or is there any other specific highlights that kind of, that really spoke to you?
Yeah, so that definitely was one of the ones that stood out the most to me, just because of the amount of money and time and effort that we spend on our checkups and having to go in, so much at the end of your pregnancy. And then also she talked about how infertility goes up 1% per year and sperm counts continue to go down 1% per year, and just how we almost have this epidemic of infertility. And a lot of that has to do with, what we're consuming and all the things that we're putting on. I think it was in this interview where she talked about, just a little bit of this and a little bit of that is actually still a lot of poison that's accumulating in our bodies, from the deodorant that we use to the lotion that we use to what's in our food to even the water that we drink, and just how our bodies are breaking down. It's literally one of the biggest, I think, crises in America right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think all those things stood out to me as well too. I think for me, one of the things that stood out, and as a cardiovascular nurse practitioner, whenever I'm talking to my patients, I really try and kind of talk with them in a way that they can understand. And one of the main things I try to focus on with my patients is, what is the root cause? A lot of times we'll be consulted for congestive heart failure or blood pressure issues, and a lot of times specifically an irregular heart rhythm called atrial fibrillation. And when I get consulted on these atrial fibrillation patients, a lot of times I will talk to the patient about, ultimately I want to treat the underlying cause. Well, kind of the quickest way to solve atrial fibrillation is we can cardiovert you or shock your heart back into rhythm. But ultimately I want to try and figure out what is the underlying cause. And a lot of times I'll see in patients that are extremely dehydrated, it can irritate the heart muscle and cause patients to go into atrial fibrillation. A lot of times it can be an acute infection, whether it's a urinary tract infection in older adults or any kind of other infection that may be irritating the heart muscle as well too. It could be a blockage in the heart as well too. And if we can treat that with a stent or things of that nature, I always try to focus on what is the underlying cause. And I felt like this podcast did a great job of trying to figure out what is the underlying cause of what is causing this health crisis in America. And, kind of along the same lines of my profession, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but going back to the COVID pandemic, people always ask me, Eric, what was your experience during COVID? What are the patients like that you saw in the hospital? Was it as bad as the media portrayed? And it was bad. There was a lot of very sick patients in the hospital, but there's always a lot of sick patients in the hospital. And I always tell people that, there's exceptions to every rule, but my experience, this is purely anecdotal, is that about 90 to 95% of the patients that were very sick in the intensive care unit that I saw, that I treated, 90 to 95% of those patients had metabolic health issues. They were overweight. They had multiple comorbidities. Specifically, probably the number one that I saw is patients that had diabetes had the worst outcomes when it came to COVID. Elderly adults, metabolic health, diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, all of these things. Well, what's causing all of these issues in these patients? And I feel like this podcast and both the people, who was it, Casey and
Callie
Means,
their brother and sister,
did a great job of trying to focus on the root causes.
And Eric, will you share a little bit about their background, if you remember of it? Because she was a top physician in her class at what university was it?
She was a top physician at Stanford University. And her brother, he first got involved in politics and got into the lobbying kind of industry in DC. And he later got into business. He worked for Coke and I think some of these big pharma companies. So they have a really good perspective on both these institutional structures, whether it's in healthcare or in politics or in business. And it was really interesting for me to listen to them as well, too, because, and this isn't to toot my own horn or anything along those lines, but before I became a cardiovascular nurse practitioner, I worked for KPMG as an auditor, auditing public companies. So I was able to kind of relate to both of them. And it really is, I always go back to this. One of the things that stood out to me is that you and I, Heather, we always talk about this. What are the incentives of people? And probably about 99% of the time, the main incentive for people is money driven. And if you follow the money, you're going to figure out kind of what these people's priorities are and what they're pushing and why they're pushing it. And I feel like they did a great job of describing all the money that is invested in medical schools from big pharma. All these big pharmas investing money in the NIH, the National Institute of Health, all these areas. And why are they investing all this money? They want to push a agenda, in my opinion. And sometimes there are conflicts of interest, and I feel like they did a great job of exposing those.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And I think that it is really cool to hear from your perspective because you have been on both the business end and also the healthcare end. Another thing that I thought was really fascinating was they talked about how healthcare is the largest growing industry in the United States. It's growing bigger and faster than AI and then technology. And to me, that was really astounding. Did you think that was, or did you know that already?
Yeah, I mean, I know healthcare is definitely one of the fastest and largest growing industries in America. There's the most amount of money, even AI, there's a ton of money in that, but it's still growing as well, too. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of like I was saying, like if you follow the money, that's where you're going to figure out where people's priorities are and basically figure out why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah. And I think that one of the other, I guess this would be my second biggest takeaway, was really thinking about how she really harped on how if you go to a doctor right now and you tell them 10 different issues that you're having, you're more than likely going to be sent to 10 different specialists. And so she was talking about how she really had almost this crisis of her career, which is ultimately what made her put down her scalpel. As she said, I had a patient walk in that I knew was just going to keep coming back to me to get relief for her sinus cavities. But ultimately the sinus cavities, her diabetes, her, migraines, all these things were symptoms of inflammation. And so the inflammation was just going to keep coming back and keeping her, a paying patient to the healthcare system. And so ultimately her point was that we have been brainwashed, she was saying, as doctors and as a population, that the body is disconnected, that you need to go to a nose doctor for this and a ear doctor for this and a heart doctor for this. But she was like, the body is one system and we really have to start seeking out individuals who are willing to look at the body as a whole.
Yeah, for sure. That stuck out to me as well too. I see it every day, all the different specialists in the hospital. And there are definitely, don't get me wrong, like I think a majority of physicians are in it, for all the right reasons. They want to help people, but they're confined by a system and big corporations that a lot of times run these healthcare industries that are, pushing, the bottom line, trying to create the most amount of revenue with the least amount of expenses. And a lot of times these physicians who want to do the right thing, they're kind of trapped basically. And I think the other thing that kind of stood out to me is they did a great job of kind of telling everybody what the problem is. And then they kind of got into a little bit about what can we do about this and what are some practical ways. So were there any practical ways that you kind of thought about maybe how it could affect our family or families that are listening to this podcast?
Yeah, for sure. So ultimately, I feel like what they got down to, in case you haven't listened to it yet, is they talk about metabolic health dysfunction ultimately is the root cause of a lot of these issues that people are having in their bodies, the obesity, the diabetes, the chronic conditions. But one of the things that I think that is, as Eric and I were taking in all this information, we just thought, how can we practically play this out in our family? And I think one of the very small ways is just starting to look at how we can tweak our kids' food. And I think that we fall into the system as well because you go to any restaurant and what's on the kids' menu? Processed foods. Like the options are hot dog, French fries, mac and cheese, all processed things. And so just expanding our kids' palates at home, to me specifically, that looks like I would love to take red dye 40 out of our kids' diet. Red dye 40, you ask, what is that made up of? Well, it's petroleum. And petroleum, I can't imagine is that good to be putting in your body. And they show all the things that how red dye 40 can affect autism and all kinds of issues in kids and the brain. It's wild. So that's just one small tweak that I feel like Eric and I want to be aware of.
Yeah, I think that's one very specific thing that, you can be aware of. For me, I think, and one of the things that you and I have talked about here recently as well, too, is, I think it's so important to try and simplify your life. You hear about all these big problems, and sometimes they seem so big that it almost paralyzes you to do anything because you're like, this problem is so big. Where do I even start? And how can I even begin to help my family? And I think the one word that came to my mind when I was listening to was just simplify. In a world today that is so complicated, you have so many things pulling on different strings, so many different ways in which your time is just drawn to other things. Try and focus on the things that are important to you. And for Heather and I, the most important things are our family, being present, setting aside time. We've had another podcast where we talked about we're trying to limit our cell phones. And I think that's a huge part of overall health as well, too. But simplify. It's eating a good diet. It's eating whole foods. It's trying to eliminate processed foods. It's trying to eliminate added sugars in your diet. It's getting good sleep every night. It's really not that hard. It's your diet. Keep it simple. Keep it clean. It's your sleep patterns. Try and get enough sleep. It's being present with your family, and if you can do all those three things, I think those are very concrete ways to try and at least start bringing our overall health back into balance. And those are kind of the things that stood out to me and are things that I want to continue to strive for in our family.
Yeah, and I actually was talking with a girlfriend about this week, and she was talking with me about how she listened to this interview and they were going to be simplifying. And she was like, one thing that I'm really trying to do is use this as a learning opportunity for my kids. So when I say to my kids now, I don't want you to have that candy, and they say, well, why not? I just say, let's look at the back of it. What ingredients do you see here? And then when they say, well, what is red dye 40? Then she said, we literally go over to our little Alexa and say, hey, Alexa, what is red dye 40 made up of? And if it says petroleum, then we say, hey, Alexa, what's petroleum? And the kids are like, ew, gross, we're eating that. So I just thought that was such a fun, just tangible takeaway of ways that you can be talking with your kids about it. And like you said, keeping it simple. We don't have to overcomplicate everything. And Eric and I are certainly not going to take away the mac and cheese that's Layton's favorite food right now, but we might just buy the organic brand instead, just the little tweaks. Or for instance, we were talking about, well, next time we go to Costco, let's just buy the organic chicken nuggets. It's like starting very small.
Yeah, little things like that. And I think just like this is kind of not so much a practical thing, but one of the things that stood out to me as well too is that Callie and Casey Means pointed out is that the human species is the only species with an obesity epidemic. Mm-hmm. You look at all other species, all different other kinds of mammals, they don't deal with obesity. There is no obesity in deer, in any other species. There is no obesity epidemic. It's only in humans, and specifically in North America amongst U.S. citizens. I think another statistic they threw out is that adolescents in the U.S., at least I can't remember the exact statistic, but I want to say it was around 40 to 50% of adolescents are obese in the U.S. In Japan, it's 3%. Well, I mean, that's crazy. And what's the difference? I mean, there is a cultural difference, but there is a huge difference in diets as well too, and food standards and food regulations. And I just really think that's something to be aware of. And
can I add on to that? I also, one thing that we were talking about in relation to this is that we do have more power than we think as consumers. So if they notice at the grocery stores that there's more stuff sitting on the shelves because it has all these fortified crazy things in it that are stripped of the fiber, that are high fructose corn syrup and things that aren't good for you. And the problem is your body doesn't recognize it. So your body doesn't recognize high fructose corn syrup. It doesn't realize that it's getting food. It's not satiated. So you keep eating. These scientists are literally doing their job, which is to sell more food, but they're doing that by pumping it full of more addictive things that don't actually satiate your body. And so with all that said, now I'm getting lost in the weeds, sorry. But I just want to bring it back and say that truly, it's just really about taking the time to read ingredients, shop the perimeter of the store, just kind of getting back to the basics of what we know to do.
Yeah, like I said, I'll just reemphasize, and I encourage everybody to try and just simplify your lives as much as possible. Simplify your diets, whole foods. You can't eat enough protein, vegetables, things like that. Whole foods. Cut out the added sugar. Cut out all the manufactured seed oils and things of that nature as much as you can. I know that's impossible to do completely in an environment we live in, but I encourage everybody to go back and listen to this podcast, and maybe you'll link to the podcast, Heather,
in the show notes. Yeah,
in the show notes. But anyways, yeah, it was a great podcast, and I'm glad you recommended it.
Yeah, for sure. So my thought finally came back to me, but it was that basically if you show the grocery stores and these retailers that you're not spending your money on the low quality products, and they will have to shift if the demand is there and the money is moving away from it. You're going to show them with the power of your dollar where you want them to take the food system. And then the last thing I want to say, and I just thought it was really cool to hear from someone who, I don't think that Callie and Casey Means claim to be Christians. I think that they're very open to spirituality. I think they're on their own journey. But she even said that she is taken aback by the spiritual corruption of our society. She said, truly, I think we're in a spiritual crisis. And she said, I used to think that, having kids was just a waste of time, and I wanted to climb the corporate ladder, and, why would I waste my time slowing down and having children? And she said, but now I realize that there's no greater thing you can do than have healthy kids that are thinking for themselves and having healthy food. And I just thought that that was so cool to hear from someone who's not even a believer to come to that realization. Did you listen to that part of the combo?
Yeah, I listened to that, and yeah, I think it kind of goes to show, like, as fellow Christians, there's always an underlying aspect of our faith in core principles that people that maybe aren't Christians, they still believe in Christian principles, which is another, in my humble opinion, a way that the Lord directs us towards him as well, too, for people that maybe have never even heard the word or the gospel before. But I did find that interesting as well, too.
Yeah, definitely. And then last thing that I'll say is she said this at least 3 times in the interview. She said every drug has side effects. So they were asking about a number of different drugs, I think, on the show. And that's just what she kept saying. So I think that's such a good reminder. I hope that we've encouraged you to go listen to that show. I will link it in the show notes. I'll also link the episode where Eric and I discussed how we're trying to use our phones less. And then if you guys will do us a favor, screenshot this episode, share it with a friend, believer or not. This is something every single American needs to hear. Eric, anything else you want to say in closing?
I think this last thing that I tell my patients a lot is that sometimes less is more. And if you can change your diet, I would much prefer you change your diet, you change your lifestyle before I prescribe a medication for you. Less is more in general, just as far as medications, as far as all the different strains we have on our life. Try and simplify, focus on your family, and focus on simple whole foods. And those are the things that I would recommend.
Absolutely. Thanks. And I love that you guys got to hear from Eric on this too, with his medical perspective, his business perspective, and obviously he's my husband. We're actually celebrating our anniversary today. And so I'm so thankful for him. 16 years of marriage. So grateful for him and the marriage. And then last thing I'll say is I'm also going to link back to an episode that I did with Dr. Dan Sullivan, who shared a lot about the beginning of the medical system and kind of where it gets its roots and how it got started, and where you can learn more about the basics of the Callie and Casey Means conversation as well. So head down to the show notes. We'll see you guys next Tuesday. Have an awesome day. Okay, friend, that's a wrap on this week's episode. If you're not already following me on Instagram, make sure to screenshot this episode, share it to your stories, and tag @Healthy by Heather Brown so I can connect with you in my DMs. It truly brings me so much joy to see how these episodes impact you. Make sure to subscribe so we can see you back here next Tuesday for our weekly show. In case you don't know, your downloads, ratings, and reviews are the actual lifeblood of this podcast, and it helps spread the word to your friends and family. So please hit the download button on this episode and leave a 5-star rating if you super loved it. And if we're really BFFs, you'll spread the happy and text this podcast link to someone who needs to hear it today for some encouragement. Scroll down to the show notes on this episode to see any and all links mentioned, freebies to fuel your health goals, prior-related episodes, and the 7-day free trial of my exclusive membership where I personally coach and cheer you on in whole health. While you're there, make sure to check out my Amazon storefront with healthy snacks, my favorite look for less workout outfits, and books and devotionals that challenge me in my faith. If you ever need to find my Amazon storefront, just Google Healthy by Heather Brown Amazon and it will come up. Have a great day, Girl Gang.